factoring perfect square trinomials and the difference of squares. Let's start with the first one, factoring perfect square trinomials. Let's go back and revisit some older videos. If you recall, we had in the past, we asked you to solve this one, a plus b squared. And if you remember, we said if you can't remember the outcome of that, just go ahead and multiply it by itself. Use the FOIL method. And if you FOIL this one, you will have a squared plus ab plus another ab plus b squared, which will give you a squared plus 2ab plus b squared. Also, if you tried a minus b squared, the answer to that, if you use the FOIL method again, it's a minus b times a minus b. This will give me a squared minus 2ab plus b squared. Now, factoring perfect square trinomial is actually the reverse of these two. It says if you see a problem that looks like this, you can rewrite that as a plus b squared. And if you see one that looks like this, a squared minus 2ab plus b squared, you can factor that as a minus b squared. So we're going to be using these two rules here. I'm not really a huge fan of them. I rather factor them what I learned in the previous video, 2 videos ago. Factoring a trinomial where the leading coefficient is 1. Or if it's not 1, we'll use the other one too. Factoring trinomials where the leading coefficient is not 1. But we'll practice some of these. Let's take an example and go through it and see how that works out. Factor x squared minus 8x plus the 16. Now, here's the x squared. We'll leave it alone. Let's leave a space here. Let's jump to the 16. I can write the 16 as what? 4 squared. That's what 16 is. So if somehow I can write this as something times 4, well, the 8 is 2 times 4 times x. And what do you know? That fits that form. This is your a squared. This is your b squared. This is the minus. This is 2. Times a times b. And once you know that fits that form, you know the answer to that when you factor it, it's going to be a minus b squared. So my answer to this, if I factor it, a is x, b is 4, and that's the answer. Now, did you have to use this method? No. Again, you could have went back to what we learned before, and I'll take you back in case you forgot. Notice the leading coefficient here is 1. So I'm going to look at the plus 16. Since that's a positive, that tells me both signs are the same, both the same as this. So they're both going to be negative. Let me write the factors of 16 and their sum. To get 16 could be negative 8 times a negative 2. The sum is negative 10. Not good. I want it to be negative what? 8. Could be negative 4 times a negative 4. The sum is what? Negative 8. Perfect. So to factor that, it's x minus 4 times x minus 4, which is x minus 4. Notice there's two sets of them. That's why the power of 2. So we've done the problem both ways, using that perfect square method there, or basic factoring. If that makes sense to you, stay with it. If you don't like it, just go back to your basic factoring and factor the problem. Let me try another one. Let's take factor x squared plus 12x plus the 36. The good news, the 36 is what? Is actually 6 squared. So this is 6 squared. This is x squared. The 12 can be written as 2 times 6 times x. And now when we try to match it with the special form, this is a squared. This is b squared. And this is 2 times b times a. So that fits the format. Since that's a plus, that's actually a plus b squared. And since a is x and b is 6, x plus 6 squared. Let's factor it again without using the perfect square trinomial method. I'm showing you both. You get to choose which one you like better. The leading coefficient is 1. You know that's x and x. And the 36, notice that's a plus, which means both signs are the same. Same as this one. So here's the 36. These are the factors of 36. And there's the sum of them. They both have to be positive, so it could be 6 times 6, the sum is 12. Could be 4 times 9, the sum is 13, that's not good. Could be 12 times 3, that's the sum is 15. Could be 36 times 1, the sum is 37. The only one that gives me a sum of 12 is this one, because I want it to be plus 12. So it's actually going to be plus 6 here and plus 6 here, which is x plus 6 squared. Let me try a few more. X squared plus 9 minus 6x. Again, I like to rewrite them in descending power. X squared minus 6x plus the 9. This is x squared. The 9 is actually 3 squared. The 6 can be written as 2 times 3 times x. This is your a squared. There's the minus 2ab plus b squared. Again, this is a minus. That means when you write that, that's a minus b squared. And a here is what? X minus b here is 3 squared. The other way of factoring, again, x squared minus 6x plus 9 is going to be x and x. That's the plus 9, the same sign, same as this. Here are the factors of the 9 and the sum of them. 9 is 9 times 1, or it should be negative 9 times a negative 1. Both are negative. That's a negative 10. Or it could be 9, or negative 3 times negative 3. And that's a negative 6. Perfect. That's what I want it to be, negative 6. So that's a negative 3, and my answer is x minus 3 squared. Let's try another one. Factor x to the 4th plus 8x squared plus the 16. Notice x to the 4th here, not squared. And there is no greatest common factor. There's nothing common to all three of them. And why is that here then? Well, you can look at the x to the 4th and write that x squared squared. That's x to the 4th. Power to power, you multiply. Plus, let's leave a space there. The 16 can be written as 4 squared. And the 8 will be written as 2 times 4 times x squared, the middle piece. Now that fits that form. This is a squared this is 2 times a times b, and this is b squared. And because that's a plus, when you factor it, that's a plus b squared. And a here is x squared, and b here is 4. Square that. And you really can't factor the inside of that. That can't be simplified anymore. So that's my answer. As I said, I'm not a huge fan of memorizing these techniques. To me, it's like too many things to remember. If everything fails, go back to basic factoring. The next method, it's a popular one. That you need to memorize, and that's factoring the difference of, usually I call it 2 squares. And again, going back to, if you have a minus b and you want to multiply it by a plus b, use the FOIL method to multiply. You will have a squared ab minus ab minus b squared. So a squared plus ab minus ab minus b squared. And if you clean it, that's a squared minus b squared. And the difference of 2 squares, it says, here's the rule. If you have a squared minus b squared, when you factor that, that's a minus b times a plus b. The question is, when do I use that? How do I know when to use it? And the answer is easy. Look for a few things. First, make sure you only have 2 terms. Make sure they're both squared, and make sure the sign between them is negative. 3 things. Both of them are squared. Make sure there's only 2 terms, and make sure the sign between them is negative. Except every once in a while we trick you. And I'll give you an example immediately to show you what I'm talking about. If I said to you factor x squared minus 81, well, that has 2 terms, just like what you told me here. 2 terms, good. Has a minus sign between them, good. But they're both supposed to be squared. Well, this is not a squared. That means I can't use it, at least yet. But if you look closely at 81, you can rewrite the 81 as what? Isn't that a 9 squared? So if you take the 81 and change it to 9 squared, that fits that form. This is a, and there's the squared, there's the minus, and this is the b, and there's the squared. And the rule says you can factor that as a minus b times a plus b. So I should be able to write that a is x, that's x minus 9 times x plus 9. Let's try another one. Factor y squared minus 25. Two terms again, minus sign between them, good, but they're not squared. I can rewrite that. Y squared minus 5 squared. That's what 25 is. A squared minus b squared. A minus b, a plus b. It doesn't matter which one you write first, the positive or the negative. You can flip-flop these. So it's actually y minus 5 times y plus 5. Factor c squared minus 100. That's c squared minus 10 squared. That's what 100 is. Again, that's a squared minus b squared. A minus b, a plus b. A here is c, and b here is 10. C minus 10, c plus 10. Factor x squared plus 25. Notice this sign is positive. If this sign is positive, you only have two terms. Yes, I can write that x squared plus 5 squared. That's fine. But because this sign is positive, it cannot be factored. You cannot factor this. Because the sign is positive. You can only factor it if that sign is negative. Once the sign is positive, forget it. Can't be done. Now I made all these problems. The first piece is straightforward. So is the second one, just a number squared. It could be more complicated than that. A few more examples. 9x squared, I want to factor that, minus 25y squared. Well, the 9x squared, I can rewrite that as 3x, because 3 squared is 9, the whole thing squared, minus 25 is actually 5 squared, so I can write that 5y, the whole thing squared. Now that fits the form a squared minus b squared, which is a minus b times a plus b. Notice I keep writing that because if you write that 4 or 5 times, you'll remember it. A here is 3x and b here is 5y. So 3x minus 5y times 3x plus 5y. Factor 16x squared minus 49y squared. Again, I can write that the 16 is 4x the whole thing squared. 49 is 7 squared, that's 7y the whole thing squared. So a squared minus b squared, a minus b, a plus b. A is equal to what? 4x. B is 7y. And that'll be my answer. Let's try 2 more examples, then we'll call it a night. Four x to the 4th minus 9y to the 6th. I get 2 terms. I'm thinking about the difference of 2 squares. I get 2 terms. I get a minus between them, but that's not a squared. That's a 4. That's a 6. So I'm missing that third piece. Well, I can take this and rewrite that as the 4 is 2 squared. 2x squared, the whole thing squared. If you remember, 2 to the power of 2 is 4. X squared squared, when you multiply, or power to power, you multiply the exponents. 2 times 2, which is 4. The 9 is actually 3 squared. That's 3. And this will be y to the 3rd, the whole thing squared. 3 squared is 9. Power to power, you multiply the exponents. 3 times 2, that's a 6. That does fit the format of a squared minus b squared, which is a minus b, a plus b. So that becomes 2x squared minus 3y to the 3rd, 2x squared plus 3y to the 3rd. One more. Looks like you need one more example. 64x to the 8th minus 81y to the 10th. I'm just having fun with them. I mean, the 64 is at 8 squared, so that's 8 x to the 4, the whole thing squared. 8 squared is 64. X to the 4 squared, power to power, you multiply. 4 times 2, that's 8. 81, that's a 9 squared. Y to the power of 5 squared. 9 squared is 81. Y to the 5th squared, power to power, you multiply. 5 times 2 is 10. So this is your a squared. This is your b squared. A minus b, a plus b. So that will make it 8x to the 4th minus 9y to the 5th times 8x to the 4th plus 9y to the 5th. And that's as far as you can go with this problem.